Hi. So we're talking today about the constitutional foundation for the principles of federalism in Canada. We're going to start with 1867, the British North America Act. Now this was a piece of British legislation which had a very colonial feel to it, even if we look at it as the date of the historical founding of the modern country of Canada. It's interesting to note that at this time, John A. Macdonald, the founding Prime Minister of Canada, originally wanted a unitary state like France or England. However, the experience of the American Civil War just a few years before 1867 showed the need to represent regional interests. So this was at the heart of the creation of federalism in Canada, having provincial governments as well as a national federal government. So in 1867, these were very clearly enunciated, the division of powers between these two levels of government. You'll see the federal government will take control over areas that are of a traditional feature of the state, such as defense, the post office, which was an important thing at the time, as well as other areas that aren't so important now, like steamboats and interprovincial ferries. At the same time, the provincial government got jurisdiction over different areas, with the underlying principle being what is of a purely local nature should be governed locally. So it's interesting to note that they also, according to 9213, they had areas such as property and civil rights, which is why in Quebec you'll have a civil code that legislates over areas such as contracts and property. But other areas such as health and education, which in 1867 were largely looked after by the church, were given to the provinces. Of course, now, with an expanded welfare state, these areas are the largest areas of public spending. If Canadian federalism can be characterized by one feature, right now it's confusion. You might well ask yourself, why do we have a federal health minister if this is expressly an exclusive competence of the provincial government? That's a good question. In the name of national unity, there's a search for a kind of balance between the different provinces and for levels of national standards in these areas of health and education. That's why the federal government will often step in with legislation and also with funding, more importantly. So that's about it for the 1867 Constitution.
And so this brings us to 1982, which was a historic year for Canada in the sense that we made a symbolic break with our colonial past, in as much as we brought home our Constitution. The Constitution of 1867, as Nelson explained, was British law, and in 1982 it became a Canadian law, and Canada also gained the ability to independently modify its own Constitution. Now this is very interesting because although this is seen as a new constitutional law, it was pretty much based on the BNA Act, as Nelson explained. It kept the same separation of powers and kept many of the same attributes towards towards government, in the sense that the Senate, the House of Commons, and also for the provincial governments was the same as it had been labeled out in 1867. Now, it's important to note that Quebec did not sign on to the constitutional law of 1982. Actually, Quebec was a courageous and outspoken critic of what it perceived as a centralizing nature of this new law. And this centralizing nature that was perceived by Quebec, but by other parts of the country, mainly the western provinces, is interesting in as much as it is extremely Canadian. There are actually two very fundamental contradictions at the heart of this constitutional law of 1982, which are beautiful examples of our political reality. The first being the fact that to amend this Constitution of 1982 in important areas such as the Senate, the monarchy, or the separation of powers between the federal and the provincial government, there is a need for unanimous approval between all levels of government and all governments, whereas this Constitution was not unanimously approved. And the second contradiction would be the centralizing nature of this Constitution with regards to our very strong federation. Now, obviously, this is what makes this country great, is that we can work within the great. So as much as this constitutional law can be seen as centralizing or not, it has led Canada to a period of political stagnation, because obviously with an amendment formula which requires unanimous approval, we cannot move forward, since a unanimous decision within a framework of 10 provinces and one federal government in our current Canadian politics is virtually impossible.